everybody, how's it going? Corey here from Themeco with a quick video on how to create your first single page or post layout using our layout builder. So what do I mean when I say single page or post layout? Well, in the world of WordPress, we've got basically lots of different post types that we work with. By default, there are the page and post types in WordPress, but different plugins might add different bits of content for you to work with. For example, WooCommerce adds the product post type, which is the singular entity for any individual product in your shop. Each of those single items represents an endpoint of sorts that you can get to on the front end of your site somehow. And one of the most common ways that we use this are blog posts. So for example, every time I add a new post to my blog, I can end up at an individual post that looks something like this. I've got my title, maybe the publish date, a featured image if there's one set, and some content, amongst other things that we may or may not wish to add. However, I don't have just one of these posts. In fact, if it's a blog that's been around for a while, you might have dozens of posts across your blog. For example, I've got a lot of test content in here that I'm playing around with, and you'll see that if I click through to any of these example posts, I'm using that same template, that same layout from before. We've got our kind of maroon header, we've got the color palette we've created, the title with the size and placement that it's got, our featured image, and of course our content. So these overall layouts, while presentationally are very similar to a one-off page that you might create in the page builder, functionally they are a little different because we need to create effectively a structure that gets used throughout all of these singular endpoints in our database. So when I click on any of these posts, they will all have a uniform look that ties them all together. So at its core, that's what you can think of the layout builder as doing. It allows you to build kind of the scaffolding that we get to then plug in the data points we want to repeat every time we go to that template. For example, every time I go to one of these posts, I know that I'm going to want to show my title up top, my publish date here, a featured image, and the content below. And I don't want to have to design that over and over and over again. I want to design it once, pull in the content where I need it, and then assign it to the appropriate context and get working with it. It might sound a little complicated, but it's really not, and I think you'll see that it is super easy with the layout builder to get up and running in no time. So to get started in the layout builder, there's a few different ways we can do that. We can of course start from our Pro menu in the WordPress admin bar. We can find layouts and click that. Or in the back end, we've got the sidebar navigation where we could click layouts as well. However, I'm going to actually start using that asset we saw on the front end. So this is the single layout that I'm using that I've currently assigned to all of my post pages to be used across my site. Now we're going to talk about assignments in a little more detail in a bit, but just keep in mind that when you're working with these layouts, kind of like the headers and footers, you need to give them a context to be output in on the front end of your site. So even though you've made an asset in here, if you haven't assigned it anywhere, it's not going to be used yet on the front end. To assign something, all we really have to do is go to the settings pane of that asset, go down to our assignment block here, and then click on conditions. And you'll see that for this particular setting that I'm working with, I'm assigning this asset to any post type that is post, which basically just means any blog post will use this layout for that blog post. Now, before we create our own single template from scratch, let's just take a look at this asset I've got pulled up and just kind of see how things are working in this context. You'll see in a moment when we create our first single template that we will select a context or a type. We basically need to tell the builder that we're going to be building a single asset. So something that's going to be used for a page, a post, something along those lines. When we do that, the live preview will be able to pull in some data from a pre-selected post, and then we can of course always change the context using the context switcher in our preview manager. Now to see how some of this works in practice, let's just click around and see what we've got. So this is a button that's taking us back to our blog page, and really all we've got going on here is a button that we've styled to fit the rest of the content in that div. And it's really just pulling through a dynamic content string to our blog URL. And again, you don't need to remember these strings on your own. We can simply click on the dynamic content icon here and then search for the item we're looking for, select that, and it will be populated for us. Also, take note that when we hovered over that item, instead of the normal blue or perhaps green that you might see for an inline editable item, we get this yellow observer with the dynamic content icon to the left of the label. And really that's just a helpful hint informing you that, hey, this item is dynamically populated. The text in there is not hard-coded. It's something that's set with dynamic content. So similarly, we can click on this text element, which again is just populated with some dynamic content pulling through the publish date with a specific format here. We've got our headline that's pulling through the title from our post. You're kind of seeing the patterns emerge here, right? And then we've got our featured image. One little difference here is that we'll need to set some alt text, and this is how I've set it up here. And then for the image itself, instead of setting a source using the plus button here, we would select our dynamic content icon, select featured image in the list there, and we'll see that first featured image show up. And then finally, we've got our content showing up here. And this is just in a column that we're fading in. And the content is kind of a unique thing in WordPress. There's some filtering and other stuff going on the back end side of things that we need to do specially. So instead of this being an actual dynamic content string, there actually is an element in the element library called the content. And you'll see it under here, under dynamic. So wherever you want to pull through the content that is being set up in the back end in your post or your page, that's where you would place this element when working on your template. And that will bring that content through on the front end when you see an individual source that you're working on. So now that we've kind of broken that down a bit, let's actually create our first single post from scratch. So to do that, we're going to click on our main navigation, select layouts, and then we're going to click this plus button here to make a new post layout. And we're just going to call it my post. This could be anything you want, whatever you want to distinguish it. It's just going to be used in that list on the last page. And then we need to make sure we select the appropriate type. So for any type of single page or post, or maybe a custom post type that has a singular entity, this is what you would select. If you were building out a blog index or a taxonomy archive, archive would be your choice. And then for WooCommerce products, you would select WooCommerce single. And for like your shop page, you would select WC archive. And really, the main difference with these is just the data that gets pulled into the live preview to make sure we are showing you the proper context. And then also some of the starter templates we provide you with to kind of get your head wrapped around some of the ideas with this. So we're going to select single because that's what we're working with. And then we will click create layout. Now doing this is going to create a new layout, and then we can go into that layout. Since we haven't saved here, we're just going to save our changes we made to the old layout, move in here, and you can see that it's really no different than working on a page in the page builder. We can start from scratch by adding a section and designing it. But what we really recommend is using one of our starter templates. Now, this is a collection of just a bunch of very simple layouts illustrating some different ideas that you might want to use when getting started on your site. So for example, let's say for my particular post layout, I wanted to use this overlap landmark number 1. And really the difference here is that you'll see that all these overlap landmark settings or templates have the title up here in this kind of landmark header section. But this first one has the content to the left, this one has the content to the right, and this one has full width content. So that's the main difference between the 1, 2, 3 versions of each template that you see here. So I'm going to select this overlap landmark number 1. And we can see that once we've done that, we get a template that looks just like the little icon we saw before. We've got our kind of landmark header up here. We've got a headline that is already set up to be pulling through the title for us. We've got our main content here where we've already set up the content element to be in our first column. And then in the second section here, if I go into my final column, you'll see that we've got an empty widget area. Now, I'm not using widget areas on my site, and this is just how we set up these starter templates by default for you all to kind of get a hang of things, but you can put anything you want in here. Remember, this is the general template you would be using across all of your posts throughout the site once you assign it. So for example, if there's anything you wanted to just be in a sidebar next to your post content for every post on your site, you would put that here in your layout, and that would be repeated everywhere. You could maybe put some code for ads if you're using that on your site, something to run a special offer, just anything you need in there. You could simply get rid of this widget area and put any of our normal elements that you're used to working with there. And again, these are just simple templates meant to show you how we've got the dynamic content set up, a tiny little bit of structure to see how things are working, and you can adjust it from there and get anything you want, even just like the last post layout that we were using. Now, the most important part of this entire process is something that we haven't even done yet, which is the assignments. You need to make sure when you're working with the layout builder, whether you're making an archive or a single asset, that you have assigned it to the front end of your site somewhere. Otherwise, even though you've created it in the back end, it doesn't have a context to be output in yet on the front end. And this is very similar to how headers and footers already work for you in Pro. When you design a global header, for instance, that you want to assign everywhere, you have to first design that header and then go assign it to your entire site. Or if you wanted multiple headers to use in different ways in different contexts on your site, you would need to assign it to those appropriate contexts. So there's nothing different about that here. We just need to make sure to do it. So to get your assignments up and running, it's very simple. We simply go up to the settings pane on the layout we're working on. We find the assignment section, and then we click on conditions, and we would add a condition group. Now, if you haven't done that already, you'll also notice that in the preview manager up here, we see this little yellow bubble in the lower left-hand corner of the icon. And that's just to kind of get our attention that, hey, you have not assigned this asset yet. It's not outputting anywhere on the front end of your site. And if we click into that preview manager, we will see that it says this layout is not yet assigned. So you need to manage that assignment and add a condition to it. If I click this little notification right here, it's actually going to focus me on that pane, open up the condition modal, and all I have to do is click this button right here. Now, by default, for a single template, it's going to select all singular for you as the condition. Now, singular in a WordPress context means any single asset. So that would be pages, posts, any other sort of custom post type you might be using. So that might be a little too broad for what you're looking for. And since we are specifically creating a post type layout here, we are going to select post type is post for our condition. And now that we've made that assignment, the only thing we have left to do is save our page. And then we're going to go preview it on the front end. But you'll notice something. You'll see that our old post layout is still being used for a single post. And that is because in the world of WordPress, there is something we got to keep in the back of our minds, the priority of how we've assigned things. And priority is how WordPress ensures that things run in a proper order. So whether it be templates or hooks, this priority input allows us to adjust that. And you can see from the help text here that essentially if there are two layouts that are applied using the same condition, the one with the lowest priority is going to be used. So we already have a single post layout assigned with this asset using a priority of 0, which is just our default we give you all in the builder. So if we wanted to overwrite that, we could either go unassign the other template, and for the most part, you're probably just going to have one blog template or one post template you use on your site. You know, it'd be very odd to probably have multiple things you're juggling around like that. But in this case, just to see how this works, I'm going to change this to -1, just to be less than 0. And you'll see that when I save this, go to the front end and refresh, now my new template is taken over for what would be this single post layout.